Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing Macedonia and the First World War. Now, as most people who are familiar with the First World War will know, is that it is kicked off, at least nominally, by the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand by the Serbian assassin Gavrilo Princip. Now, Princip is famously working for the Serbian organization, the Black Hand. That is an organization which we discussed in the previous video. And the reason for this assassination, I won't really get too much into that. Basically, I won't get into it at all because it's a little bit outside the scope of this video. But it's essentially a result of ongoing disputes between Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What is important to note is how this plays out on a larger scale. So essentially in 1914, as a result of this assassination, we will see a conflict, a military conflict develop between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Serbia. And what will happen is each of these two states will bring in their allies into this conflict, and it will kind of spiral out into a much larger world war. Now, what the alliances here are is, with Austria, we have discussed this in the past, but Austria is essentially in an alliance with the Germans and the Ottomans. Basically, this is part of the idea of a Berlin to Baghdad corridor, which will serve the imperial interests of these states: Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. On the other end, we will see an alliance form with the Serbs and the Russians. Now, the Russians and the Serbs are already pretty much an alliance. Serbs are acting kind of as a Russian proxy in the region. And it's not just the Russians using the Serbs as a proxy. The Serbs get their own benefit out of this. It's kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement here between the Serbians and the Russians. So that's kind of the two camps that will emerge initially. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria, and the Turks, with the Allied or the Entente powers, Serbia, Russia, and then later on we'll see the English, the French, and the other Allied powers join that alliance. Now, that leaves out Bulgaria. So Bulgaria, initially when this conflict kicks off in 1914, is neutral. They don't join either side. Basically, Bulgaria is kind of exhausted militarily after the two Balkan wars and is in no rush to join this new conflict. Regardless of that fact, Bulgaria still occupies a very important strategic position in the Balkans. It is important for both sides, both the Allies and the Central Powers, to secure a Bulgarian alliance due to, again, Bulgaria's kind of geostrategic position. Now, both sides are now offering different incentives to the Bulgarians to convince the Bulgarians to join their respective camps. So what are the Allies or the Entente offering Bulgaria? Well, the English kind of have this idea, and the other Allied powers too, to convince Serbia and Greece to forfeit some of the Macedonian territories they have won as a result of the Balkan Wars, to return those to Bulgaria in exchange for Bulgaria joining the Allied powers. For Serbia, this would mean forfeiting the portions of Vardar, Macedonia that were supposed to go to Bulgaria in the treaty between Bulgaria and Serbia in 1912. As you'll recall from our Balkan War video, that there was a treaty, a Serbo-Bulgarian treaty in 1912 that divided Macedonia, basically giving a very small portion of the northwest portion of Vardar, Macedonia to the Serbs. Everything else would go to the Bulgarians. Basically, that is the offer that is being made here. And in return for Serbia giving up these Macedonian territories, it will be compensated with territories to the west. And here we're talking about Bosnian territories, and a promise by the Allies to Serbia that it will have access to the Adriatic Sea. So basically, you're giving up Vardar, Macedonia in exchange for Bosnian territories and Adriatic access. The offer that is made to the Greeks is that the Greeks will give up portions of Aegean Macedonia. Here we're talking about these cities of Kavala, Drama, Siris. In exchange, Greece will receive the Smyrna region of Anatolia, basically what is today the city of Izmir in Turkey. That is what the Greek trade-off will be. And I should say that the Greeks are pretty open to this idea. The Greek Prime Minister Venizelos, he likes this idea. He's willing to kind of trade a few cities in Aegean Macedonia in exchange for a Greek foothold in Anatolia, which will presumably be used to kind of strengthen the Greek position in Asia Minor and the Aegean region. The problem here is that the Serbs are not willing to go along with this arrangement. The Serbs are not willing to give up Macedonian territory in exchange for Bosnian territory. And here we have a quote from a individual I'm sure everyone is familiar with, a Mr. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill has a very lengthy 6-volume, 3,000-page history of the First World War entitled The World Crisis. And I'm going to quote now from Winston Churchill in his discussions on these negotiations that are going on. So now quoting Churchill. The imminent peril in which Serbia stood and the restricted conditions under which the Allies could afford her protection made it indispensable that she should cede and, if necessary, be made to surrender the uncontested zone in Macedonia to the Bulgarians, to whom it belonged to by race, by history, by treaty, and until it was taken from them in the Second Balkan War by conquest. Serbia, even when at last gasp during the Austrian attack upon her in 1914, had found it necessary to keep large numbers of troops in the Bulgarian districts of Macedonia to hold down the native population. Right, reason, the claims of justice, and the most imperious call to necessity alike counseled the Serbians to surrender at least the contested zone. He goes on to write, quote, Serbia, however, though fully conscious of her danger, remained recalcitrant to her appeals to make this effective concession. Till the last moment, she kept her heel on the conquered Bulgarian districts of Macedonia and maintained a stubborn front to overwhelming forces that were gathered against her. So here we see that Winston Churchill is documenting that it is Serbia who kind of torpedoes this negotiation in order to bring Bulgaria on board to the Entente. Now, as a consequence of this, as a result of Serbia's unwillingness to negotiate, Bulgaria is forced to look to the Central Powers. Essentially, the Central Powers make Bulgaria an offer they cannot refuse. That is basically that if Bulgaria joins the Central Powers and the Central Powers are victorious, the Bulgarians will get the Treaty of San Stefano. They will get a Bulgarian state that incorporates all of their ethnic territories. Now, like I said, Bulgaria will join the Central Powers, and on October of 1915, Bulgaria will declare war on Serbia. Once war is declared, Bulgaria rapidly advances west, basically pushing the Serbian forces out of Macedonia into Albania. At the same time, the Austrians and the Germans are coming south and pushing the Serbians down through Albania further south into the Balkan Peninsula. Now, eventually what will occur here is, in order to kind of counter this advance of the Central Powers, the Allies will land troops, basically English, French troops, in Aegean Macedonia on Greek territory and move those Allied forces up to meet the Germans and the Bulgarians, and eventually a front will develop, referred to as the Macedonian Front, along the border of Vardar and Aegean Macedonia. Now, what this front looks like is basically Germans and Bulgarians to the north of the front in Macedonia, in Vardar, Macedonia, and to the south of the front in Aegean Macedonia, you will have British, French, Greek, Serbian, Italian forces. And this is, again, the main center of fighting in the Macedonian theater in the Balkans during this time. Now, what are the Macedonians up to during this time? Well, if you recall from the video on the Balkan Wars, there was a volunteer corps, the Macedonian Adrianople Volunteer Corps, made up of Bulgarians from Macedonia and Thrace that was fighting alongside the Bulgarian army during those conflicts. Now, that Macedonian Adrianople Volunteer Corps will be resurrected in the First World War as the 11th Macedonian Infantry Division. And this 11th Macedonian Infantry Division will be incorporated into the larger 2nd Bulgarian Army. And the 11th Infantry Division is composed entirely of Macedonians, composed of entirely of Macedonian volunteers. Its size is about 30,000 men, which I believe would make it the largest Macedonian military force in history up to this point. And it's not just the soldiers, the volunteers, the enlisted men that are Macedonians. The commanders of the 11th Infantry Division are also Macedonians. In fact, many of them are leaders of the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, or the IMRO. Famously here, the colonel, later to become general, of the 3rd Brigade, which is a portion of the 11th Infantry Division, is a Colonel Alexander Protogerov from Ohrid. Protogerov is an individual we will talk about more in the upcoming video. But in this video, I want to talk about a Lieutenant Colonel Boris Drangov. Boris Drangov is the commander of the 5th Regiment of the 3rd Brigade of the 11th Infantry Division. He is serving directly underneath Protogerov. And Boris Drangov is a Macedonian. He is a Skopje native, and he is a graduate of the Bulgarian Military Academy. And the reason why I love Drangov is because he is a very rare individual in the sense that he is one of the kind of greatest fighters for Macedonian independence in this early 20th century period. Basically, he fought for Macedonia during the Ilinden Uprising, during the Balkan Wars, and now during the First World War. During the Balkan Wars, he was on the front lines of the Thracian front. He was at the Battle of Lozengrad, at the Battle of Chetalja, at the Battle of Adrianople. He was just a very active figure in that war. And now in World War I, he is also extremely active. During the fall of 1915 into the spring of 1916, he is fighting in this 11th Infantry Division to liberate Macedonia from Serbia. And that is, again, successful. The Bulgarian army does manage to liberate Macedonia. After the liberation in the spring of 1916, the Bulgarians open up an academy, a military academy for reserve officers in Skopje. And because Boris Drangov is a very well-recognized and well-respected military tactician, he is kind of put in control of this military academy. He is the head of the military academy for these reserve officers, and he serves as that in that role from the spring into the fall of 1916. In the fall of 1916, however, he is called to the Dobrujan front. Basically, the Bulgarians have engaged the Romanians in Dobruja, and Drangov is sent to the Dobrujan front, where he is one of the commanders of the 1st Infantry Division on that front. Now, eventually, Boris Drangov will make his way in the spring, I believe in March of 1917, to the Macedonian front, and he will serve on the Macedonian front for a short period of time, up until May of 1917. What occurs in May of 1917, tragically, is the death of Colonel Boris Drangov. During a French artillery offensive, Boris Drangov is cut down by artillery fire, and like I said, he will be killed on that front. Now, this is a massive loss for Macedonia. Like I said, he is a brilliant military tactician, and in my opinion, he's probably one of the greatest military commanders in modern Macedonian history. You might be wondering why the name Boris Drangov is not more well known, why there's no monuments or statues to him in Macedonia, and that is probably because he was a self-declared Bulgarian, and most Macedonians don't like to discuss figures, even though they're Macedonian, who had a Bulgarian self-consciousness. So that is the tragic end to Colonel Boris Drangov. We will discuss his son, Kirill Drangov, in the next video, who is also very active in the Macedonian struggle. But getting back to the conflict, this Macedonian front will eventually break, and the Allies will push through the Macedonian front. And the reason for this is really due to the arrival of the Americans into the war. The Americans will join the Allies, they will join the Entente, and will land in Western Europe and engage the Central Powers on the Western Front. Now, in order to defend themselves on the Western Front, the Germans will be forced to pull troops away from the Macedonian front in order to secure their defenses elsewhere. And now basically the Bulgarians have been left on their own against this this allied force that has aligned itself against them on the Macedonian front. And even though the Bulgarians heroically defend the Macedonian front for as long as possible, eventually the Allies will break through at Dobropole and start pushing all the way up to Sofia, which will force the Bulgarians on September 29th, I believe, of 1918, to offer an unconditional surrender to the Allies, and basically the war will start coming to an end with an Allied victory. Now, you will know that I'm sure you have noticed that I have completely skipped over a lot of the major battles on the Macedonian front, most notably the Battle of Doiran. And the reason for that is the Battle of Doiran is a video in and of itself. There's no time to really get into it here. I promise I will get a video out on the Battle of Doiran eventually. But for now, we'll have to kind of skip over that. So what occurs at the conclusion of the war is in the early months of 1919, the Allies will convene in Paris for the Paris Peace Conference in order to determine what the post-war landscape of Europe will be, what the territorial divisions will be, and so forth. Now, this Paris Peace Conference will result in 5 major treaties, and the most famous of these treaties is the Treaty of Versailles. However, that is not the treaty that deals with the Balkans, specifically with Bulgaria. That treaty will be the Treaty of Neuilly. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. My French isn't great. I believe it's pronounced Neuilly. And as a result of this Treaty of Neuilly, the Bulgarians will lose even more territory than they lost at the Treaty of Bucharest. Basically, they will lose the portions of Thrace, which gave the Bulgarians access to the Aegean. The Bulgarians will lose even more Macedonian territory. Here we're talking about the city of Strumica, which was given to the Bulgarians in the Treaty of Bucharest. That will now be given to the Serbs. Even more portions of Bulgaria proper will be lost. So the Treaty of Neuilly is a catastrophe. It is a disaster for the Bulgarians. Now, regarding Macedonia and Macedonian autonomy, very little consideration is given to the issue of Macedonian autonomy and what is to become of the Macedonians in terms of what is a just outcome for them. Now, there is one individual who kind of famously petitions the Allied powers to give Macedonians their autonomy. This individual is James David Bourchier. He is an Irish journalist, and Bourchier famously writes a plea to the American President Woodrow Wilson asking for Macedonian autonomy. And here I will read Bourchier's plea to President Woodrow Wilson. Bourchier writes, quote, "In the interests of justice and the future peace of the Balkan Peninsula, it is necessary that the new frontiers of the Balkan states should be made to coincide as far as possible with the limits of nationalities. If in any instance the system of delimitation cannot be carried out, the principle that no Balkan people should be placed under the rule of another may still be maintained by according self-government to the population concerned. In the case of Macedonia, the application of this principle is desirable in view of the rival claims of neighboring countries, which have been the cause of infinite misery to the population for nearly half a century. Under an autonomous government, the population would be enabled to carry out its own interests and to live and thrive without the molestation to which it has been hitherto subjected. If we accept the theory advanced by the Serbians and the Greeks that the national consciousness of the Macedonians is quote-unquote fluid and displays no partiality to any foreign propaganda, the natural conclusion is that they should govern themselves, and that the principle, quote, Macedonian for the Macedonians, should be adopted. If, on the other hand, there exists such a partiality, the bestowal of autonomy would enable this sentiment to declare itself freely in accordance with the principles of self-determination. The autonomous Macedonian state would extend from the Shar Mountains on the north to the Aegean Sea to the south, and from the Bulgarian front on the east to the Albanian frontier on the west. The southern frontier, extending from Lake Kastoria to the mouth of the Vardar, would retain Negrita and the Chalsadiki Peninsula. It would be desirable that this autonomous state would be under the care of a mandatory power, America for preference, during the early years of its existence. It would be unreasonable to expect Serbia and Greece to renounce the Macedonian territory they have occupied since 1913 in view of the great extension which each of these states will now receive. Salonika, which is commercially inseparable from the interior, would naturally become the capital of the new state. If it is thought impossible, then a maritime outlet would exist at Kavala. The solution thus proposed would satisfy the wide-felt desire for autonomy which has existed in Macedonia and at Salonika for many years, and it would be in harmony with the principles laid down with your statesmanlike wisdom and accepted by the Allied powers. So here, what Bourchier is saying is that the solution to the Macedonian question is an independent, united Macedonian state. And regarding the character of that state, he says, if the Greeks and the Serbs are correct, that the Macedonians are a separate people and they are not Bulgarians, then that national consciousness, that ethnic consciousness, will naturally and organically emerge as part of an independent Macedonian state. If, however, the Bulgarian position is correct and that the Macedonians are Bulgarians, then an independent and free Macedonia would allow for this organic and natural Bulgarian identity to arise in Macedonia. So regardless of who's correct, give the Macedonians an independent, autonomous state, and whatever their ethnic national consciousness is will naturally emerge. So there's no conflict here with the Macedonians themselves. Now, regarding the ethnic character of the Macedonians, Bourchier is not he's not silent on this. He does actually write an article. He publishes an article publicly in addition to this plea to Woodrow Wilson, in which he addresses the case for Macedonian autonomy in a much longer format. I'm not going to read to you the whole article, but there is a paragraph in here regarding the ethnic character of the Macedonians from Bourchier's point of view, which I will read. And he writes, quote, "Why Macedonia is Bulgarian. To those who know the country, it may seem superfluous to insist on this fact, which is generally admitted in years past. But since the war, the public has undoubtedly been much misled on this point by voluminous and unrebuked partisan literature. Efforts are even made to deny that the language of the people is Bulgarian. With regard to this, it is enough to quote Weigand, a very high authority. Quote, all linguistic specialists, he says, are unanimous that it is Bulgarian and that the politicians cannot alter this fact, end quote. The language in the Northwest naturally approximates in some respects to Serbian, but even here it possesses all the distinct features of Bulgarian. Language is not necessarily a test of nationality. The Albanians in Attica, for example, may be regarded politically as Greeks, though their language of their home betrays their Albanian origins. The best test of a man's nationality is what he believes himself to be. In Turkish times, the Macedonian Slav peasant, when asked as to his nationality, invariably replied, quote, I am a Bulgarian. Today, he would be afraid to make such an avowal of his national consciousness, even though it remains the same. So here we see Bourchier, even though he is an avid advocate of Macedonian independence and autonomy, is very much aware of the fact that these people, the Macedonians, are still ethnically Bulgarians, regardless of the political need for an autonomous state. Now, although figures like him who are advocating for an autonomous Macedonia are far and few between, During these negotiations, during the Paris Peace Conference, there are some people who arise who are also supporting the idea of an independent and autonomous Macedonia. One of those people is a Lord Bryce. Lord Bryce, Lord James Bryce, is a British lord. He is a member of the House of Lords, and while these negotiations, these post-war negotiations are taking place, there are debates being held in the British Parliament as to kind of what position the Brits are going to take in these treaties. And Lord Bryce addresses the House of Lords in a speech in which he advocates for Macedonian autonomy during these negotiations. And here I will quote from Lord Bryce himself. He writes, quote, "There are, as you know, three very important boundary questions raised in regard to Bulgaria. One of them is related to Dobruja, an intricate question, and one which I think is in which I think there is a very strong moral claim that the ill-gotten claims which Romania made in 1919 ought not to have been allowed to remain with her. There are also difficult questions of Thrace, where no doubt it is very hard to determine how much of the territory should be assigned to the Bulgarians, how much to the Greeks, and how much should be left on the ground of nationality to the Turks. But I will not enter into that. I do, however, know something about Macedonia. I have traveled there and have had opportunity of observing what is the character of the population. The population of Macedonia, all the way from Ohrid and Monastir to the west, to Siris in the east, that is to say, all the way from Lake Ohrid to the rivers Vardar and Struma, is inhabited by a Bulgarian population. That is a population Bulgarian in race, Bulgarian in speech, Bulgarian in tradition, and in ecclesiastical organization. And that the Serbian population ceases a little way south of the town of Skopje, between Uskup and Vilis, and from there to a considerable way south until you approach the Greek-speaking population. It is not Serbian, but it is Bulgarian. All of this has been left in the hands of the Serbs. Lord Bryce will go on to state that Serbia had a population of little more than 2 million. And in the new state, of which Serbia is the center, the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which include Bosnia, Herzegovina, Dalmatia, Croatia, and Styria, will now have more than 8 million inhabitants, and her territory will stretch all the way from Klagenfurt nearly to the coast of the Aegean. No one can say that she has not come out well during this war, and I am heartily glad she has done so. However, under these circumstances, it would have been reasonable for her to ask her to forego whatever claim she has over Macedonia and allow that country to be made into a small autonomous state." So again, here, Lord Bryce, just like Bourchier, is stating that although the ethnic character of Macedonia is Bulgarian, the Macedonians need to be given an independent, autonomous state for geopolitical reasons. Now, you may have noticed here, if you watched the video I did on Macedonism, that both Bourchier and Lord Bryce here are essentially taking the Macedono-Bulgarian position on the Macedonian question. Again, they understand that the Macedonians are ethnically Bulgarians, but they realize that the political situation on the ground requires Macedonian autonomy and independence. And this, I should say, is the point at which the Bulgarophilist position has failed. If you recall from that video, which I just referenced, the Bulgarophil position, in its academic sense of the word, is essentially a desire for Macedonia, that is Vardar, Pirin, and Aegean Macedonia, to be incorporated into the Bulgarian state. With the outcome of the First World War and the Treaty of Neuilly, this ideology is now dead. The Treaty of Neuilly is essentially the nail in the coffin of the Bulgarophilist position, and it is no longer a politically tenable ideology. Basically, over the course of 3 wars, the First Balkan War, the Second Balkan War, and now the First World War, the Bulgarians have ultimately failed despite their best efforts, have ultimately failed to liberate Macedonia, and Macedonia is now again occupied by foreign powers. And what this does is it kind of ingrains in the minds of the Macedonians that they're kind of on their own. It is now up to the Macedonians to be the master of their own destiny and to fight for their political independence. They cannot rely on Bulgaria to do this for them, because it's obvious that Bulgaria militarily cannot secure Macedonia's independence. The Macedonians will now need to do this on their own. So again, the idea that Macedonia will be incorporated into Bulgaria, the idea of the Treaty of San Stefano, this is now a dead ideology, the same way that communism is a dead ideology post-Cold War. It is no longer a realistic idea based on the political situation that is on the ground. Now, the Macedonians, in addition to Bulgaria being unable to liberate Macedonia, there's also an organic process of ethnogenesis here that is forming, and that has been forming since the Treaty of Berlin in 1978. Basically, the Macedonians, throughout this whole period, through these several decades, from the late 19th into the early 20th century period, basically the Macedonians are having a different lived experience and political reality than the Bulgarians in Bulgaria proper. The Bulgarians living in Bulgaria have for decades been a free and liberated population living in their own state under their own monarch, and that is their political reality, their day-to-day lived experience, whereas the Macedonians have the complete opposite reality. They are being divided up, passed around from one nation to another, placed under different foreign occupations, being brutalized by Turks, Serbs, Greeks, and so forth. And so the lived experience of a Macedonian is different than the lived experience of a Bulgarian. And even though a Macedonian and a Bulgarian may have the same history, the same ethnic roots, the same language for all intents and purposes, the same culture, custom, and so forth, even though you could group them in as the same ethnic group, the experience of the Macedonians, their mindset, their consciousness, their day-to-day reality is different than the Bulgarians. And from a political point of view, the national idea, the national consciousness of the Macedonians begins to separate from the Bulgarians. Even though the Macedonians and Bulgarians were one, we see this process, post Treaty of Berlin, how they're separating further and further due to the fact that they live under different political realities. And this separation will be a reality that plays a major role in the Macedonian national development and in the Macedonian ethnogenesis. Now, here, in Chris Anastasov's book, The Tragic Peninsula, we see here on the title page, I really like this. Here, I'll move this so you can see it. The title page here, it says on the top, Macedonia for the Macedonians, a quote by William Gladstone. You will see here a map of the United Macedonia, and below here you will see a quote from Woodrow Wilson, and that quote reads, "No right anywhere exists to hand people from sovereignty to sovereignty as if they were property." So here, even though we know that Chris Anastasov understands the Bulgarian ethnic character of the Macedonians, nevertheless, he, like a lot of people during this time period, understand that what the Macedonians really require is an independent state, a united, independent, autonomous Macedonia for the Macedonians as a solution to the Macedonian question. Because if we allow the neighboring states to fight over the Macedonian territory, that fight will never end. Even if Bulgaria controls Macedonia, the Greeks and the Serbs will fight over it. If the Serbs and the Greeks divide Macedonia, the Bulgarians will try to liberate it. There will be an ongoing back and forth. There will be a continuous struggle in the Balkans for Macedonia. The only solution to stability on the Balkans and a solution to the Macedonian question is an independent, autonomous Macedonia, a Macedonia for the Macedonians. And that is the mindset going forward into this post-World War I period. Now, just because the Macedonians at this point kind of embrace the idea of Macedonia for the Macedonians doesn't mean they all conceive of it in the same way. There will be major ideological differences among the Macedonians on what it means to be, what it means to have an independent Macedonian state, what the national character will be, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions, even if we accept the idea of Macedonian independence. And these ideological conflicts will result in violence among the Macedonians, quite brutal, you can call it an ideological civil war that will develop in Macedonia among the Macedonians in the interwar period, and that is what we'll be discussing in the next video. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.